Vampire King was having dinner with his fiancée and in-laws until a waitress whispered, "Run now." The grand hall of Castle Varian was alive with the soft hum of conversation and the clink of crystal glasses. Candlelight danced across the tall, arched windows, casting long shadows that stretched like dark fingers across the polished marble floor. Portraits of past rulers lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow every guest, silent witnesses to centuries of power and betrayal. Tonight, the hall was filled with a rare formality, a dinner hosted by Lord Kale, the Vampire King, for his fiancée and her family. Lady Seraphine's heart thumped in her chest as she entered the hall, her gown whispering against the marble. She felt the weight of 1,000 eyes on her, the guests' polite smiles thinly veiling suspicion. Even before Kale appeared, the air carried a chill that seemed unnatural. It clung to her skin, urging her to shiver, and she found herself pulling her shawl closer. Kale entered without a sound, his presence immediately demanding the attention of every noble in the room. His black hair fell like silk over his shoulders, and his pale skin glowed faintly in the candlelight. The intensity of his gaze made even the most confident of Seraphine's family falter. He offered a small, controlled nod to the assembled guests, a gesture that was both polite and undeniably commanding. "Seraphine," Kale said, his voice low, smooth, and darkly melodic. "You look radiant tonight." She felt her cheeks warm at his words, a strange mix of pride and unease swelling within her. Being near him was intoxicating, yet terrifying. There was power in every movement, every glance, and she knew even the smallest misstep could cost more than just her dignity. Her father, Lord Alurin, cleared his throat. "Kale, we are grateful for the invitation. Your castle is remarkable." His words were stiff, forced. Behind them, Seraphine saw the subtle narrowing of his eyes, a silent warning aimed at her. Kale's smile was slight, almost imperceptible. "You are welcome. I trust your journey was comfortable." The conversation proceeded with the careful politeness of a courtly gathering, but under the surface, tension rippled like a hidden current. Seraphine's family seemed wary, as if measuring Kale against some unseen standard. Every so often, her mother's eyes flickered to the portraits, lips tightening at their silent, judgmental gaze. Seraphine kept her hands folded neatly on her lap, trying to absorb the rhythm of the evening, but she could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. A subtle vibration of unease ran through the room, almost imperceptible but enough to set her teeth on edge. It was then that a soft, hesitant voice brushed against her ear. "Run now." The words were barely a whisper, and they came not from the king or her family, but from a young waitress moving quickly between tables. Her eyes were wide, filled with fear, and she darted a glance over her shoulder as if certain someone would see her speaking. Seraphine froze, her fork slipping from her fingers. The words felt like a knife to her chest, urgent, impossible to ignore. "Run," she whispered back, her voice trembling. "What do you mean?" The waitress did not answer. She lowered her head, almost as if bowing, then hurried away, melting into the shadows beyond the far end of the hall. Seraphine's pulse raced. She felt Kale's gaze shift toward her, sharp and piercing. His dark eyes seemed to look straight into her mind, as if sensing the warning that had reached her. For the briefest moment, she saw something flicker there, recognition, concern, and something darker. "Is something amiss?" Kale asked, his voice smooth but edged with steel. Seraphine hesitated. Could she tell him? Would he think her paranoid or worse, naive? Yet the urgency in the waitress's eyes could not be ignored. I don't know," she said finally. A waitress said I should run. I don't understand why." Kale's eyes narrowed, the faintest tension pulling at the line of his jaw. He leaned slightly closer, the movement deliberate and commanding. "You must always listen to warnings, even when their meaning is unclear," he said softly. His words sent a shiver down her spine, both frightening and thrilling her. The dinner resumed, but the air had changed. The polite conversation had become a delicate dance of glances and veiled threats. Seraphine could feel her family's unease grow with every passing moment. They whispered quietly to one another, their words like sharp arrows veiled in silk. Cale noticed, of course. His eyes swept the table, sharp and assessing, and with a subtle gesture, the tension began to dissipate. The power he radiated was undeniable, a force that demanded respect and caution from all around him. Yet even he did not speak of the threat that Seraphine now feared might be lurking just beyond the walls of the castle. As the meal progressed, Seraphine's mind wandered to the whisper. Run now. Why would anyone say such a thing? Was it a prank, a trap, or a warning of real danger? Her thoughts swirled like storm clouds, impossible to settle. Cale's hand brushed hers briefly as he passed her plate. The touch was deliberate, electric, and Seraphine felt herself stiffen. There was an unspoken message in that single contact, a promise of protection, a warning of consequence, and a reminder of the distance between her world and his. She glanced around the hall, her eyes lingering on the portraits of Cale's ancestors. Their painted eyes seemed to glimmer in the flickering candlelight, lifelike in a way that made her stomach twist. Stories of betrayal, war, and dark pacts came to mind, tales of kings who had ruled with iron and cunning, some who had loved, some who had destroyed. The whispers of the past seemed to echo faintly in the hall, and Seraphine shivered. She felt small, fragile, and suddenly exposed. She was a guest in a world of shadows and power, and the faintest misstep could draw the wrath of those she did not even see. Then, without warning, the lights flickered violently, plunging the hall into a brief, trembling darkness. Candles guttered, sending shadows leaping across the walls like living things. Gasps rose from the guests, and Seraphine clutched her shawl, her pulse racing. When the lights returned, the air felt heavier. The portraits on the walls seemed different. The eyes of the painted kings and queens glimmered with something almost alive, almost aware. Seraphine blinked, convinced she had imagined the movement, but a cold shiver ran down her spine. Cale's expression had changed. The calm composure was gone, replaced by a flicker of something fierce and unyielding. He stood slowly, his movements smooth and predatory, and the room seemed to bend around his presence. "There are things in this castle," he said quietly, though with such intensity that the words carried to every corner, that even the most careful must respect. Some warnings must be heeded immediately. Seraphine swallowed hard, her mind racing. She wanted to speak, to ask questions, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she nodded slightly, feeling both fear and an inexplicable thrill. Across the room she glimpsed movement, too quick, too shadowed to be anyone in attendance. A flicker of white passed behind the curtains, then vanished. The whisper returned in her mind, more urgent than before. Run, or lose everything. Cale's gaze met hers again, and she saw something there that made her blood run cold and hot all at once. He knew more than he was saying. Danger was near, but whether it was meant for her, for him, or for the family sitting across the table, she could not tell. The candlelight flickered again, and in that brief, trembling moment, Seraphine understood something vital. This dinner was not merely a meeting of families. It was the beginning of a reckoning, a test of loyalty, courage, and heart. And whatever awaited them beyond the doors of the hall would not wait politely. The whisper seemed to circle her like a shadow, impossible to ignore, impossible to escape. "Run," it said, faint and urgent, echoing in the spaces between the flickering candlelight. And as Seraphine looked at Cale, standing like a dark sentinel at the head of the table, she realized the truth. She could run, yes, but even in fleeing, she might find no escape from the shadows of the Vampire King's world. The portraits on the walls seemed to shift again, their eyes glinting with knowing malice, and Seraphine felt a chill she could not shake. Something was coming, something ancient and powerful, and the castle and all within it would never be the same. Her hand trembled as she touched the edge of her glass. Somewhere deep in the hall, a shadow moved, unseen but alive. And the whisper returned once more, soft but undeniable. The castle corridors were silent, save for the distant clatter of silver trays and the occasional murmur of servants tidying the dining hall. Seraphine walked beside Cale, her fingers lightly brushing against the velvet of his coat as he led her away from the room. Her pulse still raced from the whispers of the waitress, the flickering candlelight, and the movement in the shadows she could not explain. Cale's steps were measured and silent, but every movement carried the weight of authority. Seraphine felt as though she were walking beside a storm, calm in appearance, but full of energy and danger beneath the surface. "You must tell me exactly what the waitress said," Cale said finally, his voice a low rumble that made her shiver. She just whispered, "Run now," Seraphine said, her voice barely audible. "And then she disappeared. I don't know why. I don't know if it was for me or for everyone." Cale's eyes narrowed. His jaw tightened, and the flicker of red at the edges of his irises betrayed a sudden surge of alertness. "Not everyone can hear the warnings," he said quietly. "Some messages are meant for certain people. It seems you were chosen to hear this one." Seraphine's stomach twisted. "Chosen? For what?" she asked, her voice trembling. Cale did not answer immediately. Instead, he guided her into a smaller, private chamber, one lined with thick velvet drapes and candlelight that softened the shadows. The room felt warmer, yet the weight of unseen eyes still lingered. "You need to understand something," Cale said, turning to face her fully. "My blood carries a curse, one that has haunted my family for centuries. Every generation faces a reckoning, and tonight I believe it has begun." Seraphine's breath caught in her throat. "A curse," she whispered. "What do you mean?" Cale's gaze darkened. "Long ago, an enemy sought to destroy my lineage. They bound a spell to my family, a spell that awakens when outsiders attempt to interfere with the balance of power. It can bring death, despair, or worse. It feeds on fear, on betrayal, and on mistrust." Seraphine felt the chill of his words wrap around her heart. She had heard tales of vampire kings and their dark powers, but hearing it from Cale himself, seeing the intensity in his eyes, made the legends feel terrifyingly real. "And the warning," she said slowly, "the waitress, she knew something was coming." Cale nodded, his fingers brushing the back of her hand briefly, a fleeting gesture that was both comforting and commanding. "She is part of a network that monitors threats. She sensed danger approaching and you were the first to hear, but this is only the beginning. The true threat is already here, hidden within the castle." Seraphine's eyes widened. "Inside the castle," Cale's expression was grim. "Yes. You must trust me and trust your instincts. The family you brought here tonight, not all of them are as loyal as they appear." The words fell like stones into her chest. Her parents, her mother's subtle smiles and her father's quiet nods, could they be the danger? Could the very people she had trusted most in the world be part of the threat Cale spoke of? Before she could ask, a faint sound echoed from the corridor, a soft shuffle, barely audible. Cale moved instantly, his body a blur of predatory grace. He stepped in front of Seraphine, his eyes scanning the shadows with uncanny precision. "Stay close," he whispered. "Do not let anyone pass unnoticed." Seraphine obeyed, her heart pounding as they moved silently through the castle corridors. Every painting, every tapestry, seemed to watch them. Even the ancient suits of armor lining the halls felt alive, as if ready to spring into motion at a command only Cale could give. They reached a narrow balcony overlooking the castle gardens, where the storm outside raged with sudden ferocity. Lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the twisted branches of ancient trees. Cale's eyes followed the shadows below, and Seraphine felt the weight of his gaze, protective, yet fierce, almost overwhelming. "They are here," he said finally, his voice low. "The ones who wish to challenge my rule. They are already inside, moving among the guests, hiding their intentions behind smiles and polite conversation." Seraphine swallowed hard. "But my family?" she asked, fear and disbelief mingling in her voice. Kale's jaw tightened. "I do not know who is truly loyal tonight." That is why warnings matter. That is why you must listen to whispers, to instincts, to the signs others cannot see. Tonight, trust no one without proof. A sudden crash of thunder shook the balcony, and for a moment, Seraphine felt as though the very walls of the castle might collapse. Kale's hand tightened around hers, steadying her, yet she could feel the tension radiating from him, a storm as powerful and dangerous as the one outside. "Why me?" she asked quietly, the question trembling on her lips. "Why would this curse, this threat, reach me?" Kale's eyes softened for the briefest moment, a hint of vulnerability hidden beneath the armor of authority. "Because you are tied to me now," he said. "The bond between a king and his chosen cannot be ignored by fate, by curses, or by enemies. You are part of this, whether you wished it or not." Seraphine's heart raced at his words. Part of her was terrified, terrified of the power he wielded, of the danger that now surrounded her. But another part was drawn to him, to the intensity of his presence, the raw magnetism of his command. It was impossible not to be pulled toward him, even as every instinct screamed caution. Kale guided her back inside, and they moved through a series of hidden passages known only to the king and his closest guards. Seraphine felt as though the castle itself were alive, shifting to conceal their movements, to protect them from unseen threats. At last they emerged in a quiet corridor near the castle's library. The room was vast, filled with ancient tomes, maps, and artifacts of power. Kale motioned for her to sit on a bench near the windows, and she obeyed, her hands trembling slightly. "You must understand," he said, pacing before her, "that the danger tonight is not only physical, it is also psychological. Fear, doubt, and mistrust are weapons just as sharp as any blade. If you falter, even for a moment, the consequences could be irreversible." Seraphine's mind spun. Every polite smile from her family, every whispered word during dinner, could it all have been part of a scheme? Could the warning of the waitress be pointing not just to physical danger, but to the very hearts of those she trusted? Kale stopped before her, his eyes locking onto hers. "You are stronger than you realize," he said softly, almost tenderly. "But strength alone will not protect you. You must act with courage, with clarity, and with trust in me, in yourself, and in the instincts that guided you tonight." A sudden, muffled cry echoed from the dining hall. Both Kale and Seraphine froze, their senses immediately on alert. Kale's eyes flashed red just for a moment, the power within him stirring in response to the danger. "They have begun," he said quietly, his voice heavy with warning. "The true test starts now. You must stay close to me and you must not falter." Seraphine nodded, fear and determination intertwining within her. She realized now that there was no turning back. The castle, the dinner, the whispers, everything had led to this moment. She could run, yes, but the world Kale inhabited was one of shadows, curses, and secrets, and running would not keep her safe. Only courage and trust in him could. Kale extended his hand to her, the gesture both protective and commanding. Seraphine took it, and the contact sent a strange warmth through her, a reassurance that even in the face of unseen danger, they were connected. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the library in stark, white light. In that brief moment, Seraphine thought she saw movement in the shadows, figures she could not identify, cloaked in darkness, watching, waiting. The whisper of the waitress seemed to echo in her mind once more. "Run now." But Seraphine understood something vital in that instant. To run would not save her. Only facing the danger, only standing beside the vampire king, would give her a chance to survive the night and to understand the mysteries that had already begun to unfold. The storm outside raged on, thunder shaking the castle walls. And deep within the corridors, in the shadows where eyes could not easily see, the threat moved closer, silent but inevitable. Kale's gaze met hers once more, his eyes a mixture of warning and promise. "Stay with me," he said, his voice low and fierce. "And no matter what happens, do not lose hope." Seraphine nodded, gripping his hand tightly. Whatever the danger, whatever the curse, whatever the unseen threat hiding among the noble faces of her family, she would not face it alone. And then from somewhere deep within the castle, a sound rose, a soft, chilling murmur that seemed to come from the very stones themselves. Some doors cannot be closed once opened. The storm outside had not abated. Lightning danced across the night sky, illuminating the twisted spires of Castle Varian. Rain lashed against the windows, hammering like a warning drum, and the wind moaned through the corridors, as if the castle itself were alive and anticipating what was to come. Seraphine followed Kale through the twisting hallways, her steps quick but cautious. Every shadow seemed to shift with purpose, every corner held the possibility of danger. She felt the weight of the castle pressing in, a living presence that had seen centuries of betrayal, war, and death. But beside her, Kale moved like a shadow that could never be caught, calm, commanding, and impossibly dangerous. "They are here," Kale said quietly, his eyes scanning the darkness. "I can feel them, the ones who seek to challenge me to take what is mine." "And now they know where to find you," Seraphine's pulse quickened. "But my family," she whispered. Her voice trembled with fear and confusion. "Are they part of this?" Kale's jaw tightened. "I cannot be certain. That is why tonight you must trust your instincts above all else. Trust me and yourself." They reached a spiral staircase leading down to the crypts beneath the castle. The air grew colder with each step, carrying the scent of earth and stone and something darker, something ancient. Seraphine shivered, wrapping her shawl tightly around her shoulders. "The crypts are dangerous," Kale said, his voice a low rumble. "But they are also revealing. Secrets that are hidden in light are often visible in shadow." Seraphine nodded, gripping his arm lightly for balance. She could feel his power radiating around her, protective yet overwhelming, and she wondered if she could ever truly understand the depth of his strength or the darkness it carried. When they reached the bottom of the stairs, the crypt stretched before them like a labyrinth of stone corridors, lined with alcoves containing the resting places of Kale's ancestors. Candles flickered along the walls, casting long, shifting shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. Kale stopped and held out a hand. "Stay close," he instructed. "The danger is not just in the open. They move among us unseen, waiting for the moment to strike." As they moved deeper into the crypts, Seraphine began to sense something stirring in the air, a whisper of movement, a vibration that seemed to echo within her chest. The shadows around them thickened, curling like smoke, and she felt a chill of fear that was different from anything she had known before. Suddenly, a faint, silvery glow appeared ahead of them. Figures emerged from the darkness, cloaked and silent, their eyes glinting with malice. Seraphine recognized them instantly as the rival faction Kale had warned of, vampires who had long coveted the power of the Vampire King and now sought to take it by force. Kale stepped in front of her, his stance protective and commanding. The air around him seemed to thrum with power, as though the castle itself recognized its master and responded to his presence. His eyes flashed red for a brief moment, and Seraphine felt the intensity of his energy wash over her like a wave. "Stand behind me," Kale commanded. "Do not let fear control you." The cloaked figures moved in unison, their steps silent as they surrounded the two of them. Seraphine's heart pounded in her chest. She felt the temptation to flee, but Kale's hand brushed hers, grounding her. His presence was a tether, a reminder that courage was possible even in the face of overwhelming danger. Kale's voice was steady, yet every word carried the weight of centuries. "The curse in my blood, it awakens when the balance of power is threatened. Tonight it calls for more than strength, it calls for trust. Trust in me, trust in yourself, trust in the bond we share." Seraphine swallowed hard. She felt the truth of his words resonate in her chest. There was fear, yes, But there was also something else, a sense of purpose, a call to stand even when the world seemed to demand surrender. The rival vampires struck suddenly, a blur of motion that would have overwhelmed anyone else. But Kale moved with grace and precision, intercepting them with ease. His power was terrifying, yet controlled, each movement deliberate, each strike measured. He was like a storm contained within a man, fierce and beautiful all at once. Seraphine watched, wide-eyed, as he dispatched one enemy after another, and then a figure lunged toward her. Instinctively, Kale intercepted the attack, his body moving with supernatural speed. The force of the encounter shook the corridor, sending dust and candlelight swirling. "You must act now," Kale said, his voice sharp and urgent. "Do not hesitate." Seraphine's mind raced. She remembered the charm the waitress had given her during dinner, a small pendant glowing faintly with silver light. She had carried it without understanding its purpose, but now she realized its importance. Clutching it tightly, she focused, letting the warmth and light within it flow through her. The effect was immediate. A protective barrier of soft, silver light spread outward, pushing back the rival vampires and giving Kale the opening he needed to strike decisively. The enemies recoiled, momentarily stunned, and Kale's eyes met Seraphine's, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. "You are stronger than you know," he said quietly, almost in awe. "This bond, it is more than a choice. It is a necessity." Seraphine's chest rose and fell rapidly. The danger was far from over, but for the first time she felt as though she was truly part of this world, not just a guest, not just an observer, but an active participant. She was tied to Kale in a way that transcended fear, a bond that could shape the outcome of the night and perhaps the centuries to come. The rival vampires regrouped, their numbers seemingly endless, and the shadows around them began to writhe and twist, as though the crypt itself were awakening in response to the battle. Whispers echoed along the walls, voices of the past murmuring warnings, secrets, and prophecies. Seraphine felt the pull of the ancient power, the weight of history pressing down on them. Kale moved closer to her, his presence a shield against the growing threat. "The curse is strong," he said, his voice low. "It will test us, it will demand everything, but together we may overcome it." A sudden, chilling laughter echoed through the crypts, sending shivers down Seraphine's spine. From the darkness, a figure stepped forward, taller, more imposing than the others, eyes glowing with a cold, ruthless intelligence. This was the leader of the rival faction, the one who had orchestrated the attack. Kale's gaze sharpened, and the red in his eyes burned brighter. "You have come too far," he said, his voice like steel. "You will not leave here alive." The figure smiled, a slow, sinister curl of lips. "We shall see, Vampire King," the rival said. "Tonight the curse will decide who holds the power, and perhaps who will survive." Seraphine's heart raced. She could feel the tension coiling like a spring, the air thick with magic and malice. Every instinct screamed danger, but Kale's steady presence reminded her that they could face it together. "Focus on the bond," Kale whispered, taking her hand. "It is the key. Trust it and trust me." Seraphine nodded, closing her eyes for a moment and letting the warmth of the charm and the strength of Kale's presence flow through her. When she opened them, the silver light around her pulsed brighter, intertwining with Kale's own power. Together, they formed a force that was both beautiful and terrifying, a manifestation of trust, courage, and the bond that had been forged in whispers and shadows. The rival leader's eyes widened, recognizing the strength they now wielded together. He took a step back, and the other attackers faltered, sensing the shift in power. But before victory could be claimed, a sudden crash echoed from deeper within the crypts. The floor trembled beneath their feet, and the shadows seemed to surge toward them, alive with unseen energy. Seraphine felt a cold rush of fear. The castle itself seemed to warn them that the true challenge was yet to come. Kale's eyes met hers, a mixture of warning, resolve, and something unspoken. an acknowledgement of the bond that had grown between them, of the courage she had shown, and of the trials yet ahead. "This is only the beginning," he said quietly, his voice carrying through the crypts like a promise and a threat. "The curse awakens fully soon, and when it does, we must be ready." Seraphine nodded, her hand still tightly clasped in his. She realized that the night had changed her, that she was no longer merely a visitor in this world of shadows and power. She was a participant, bound to the Vampire King, and together they would face the storm, whatever it might bring. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the crypts in a harsh, silvery light. The rival faction recoiled, but the tension remained thick and unyielding. Seraphine felt the whisper of the waitress echo in her mind once more, soft but insistent. Some doors cannot be closed once opened. Cale's gaze swept the crypts, sharp and commanding. "Prepare yourself," he said, his voice low. "The true trial begins now. And only through trust, courage, and unity can we hope to survive it." Seraphine took a deep breath, gripping his hand tightly. Whatever the curse demanded, whatever the shadows threatened, she would face it, not as a frightened guest but as the one who stood beside the Vampire King, bound by fate, courage, and a bond that no darkness could sever. The shadows stirred. The castle trembled. And in the depths of the crypts, the curse began to stir fully, awakening as it had for centuries, ready to challenge them both, and to reveal the true power of their bond. The storm had reached its peak. Lightning cleaved the sky in jagged shards, illuminating the jagged spires of Castle Varian, while rain lashed against the walls in relentless sheets. The crypts were silent now, the echo of the rival factions' retreat fading into the shadows, but Seraphine could feel the tension in the air, thick, heavy, and alive. Cale led her to the castle's highest rooftop, where the wind whipped their hair and clothes. The red moon hung low over the horizon, casting an eerie glow that painted the jagged stone in crimson and silver. Below, the castle stretched endlessly, corridors and towers twisting like the fingers of a sleeping giant. "We have little time," Cale said, his voice carrying over the roar of the wind. "The curse will awaken fully at midnight. If we are not ready, it will overwhelm us." Seraphine's chest rose and fell rapidly. She had never felt so exposed, so acutely aware of the danger and the stakes. Yet, alongside the fear, there was a strange thrill, the same thrill that had drawn her to Cale from the first dinner, when the whisper of danger had called her attention to a world of shadows, power, and hidden truths. You trust me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly though her eyes were steady. Cale's gaze softened, the sharpness of his kingly command giving way to something almost human, almost tender. "I trust you more than anyone," he said. "Tonight your courage is the key to breaking the curse. Together we can end it." The wind howled, and from the shadows on the rooftop, the rival leader emerged once more. His eyes glowed with malice, and the others, weakened but not defeated, flanked him like a living wall of darkness. Cale's red-tinged eyes glimmered with determination. "This ends now," he said. The rival leader smiled, a cold, cruel curve of lips. "You may have survived the crypts, Vampire King, but the curse is ancient. It cannot be undone by mere courage or magic. Tonight, it will choose who lives and who falls." Seraphine stepped closer to Cale, feeling the warmth of his presence against the storm. She clutched the charm the waitress had given her, letting the faint silver glow pulse through her. She could feel its power, faint but persistent, calling to her, urging her to act. Cale's hand found hers, steadying and protective. "Focus," he whispered. "Trust in the bond between us. That is stronger than any curse, stronger than any dark magic." Together they drew a deep breath, their hands clasped, hearts beating in unison. As the first strike came from the rival faction, Cale moved with supernatural speed, intercepting the enemy with precision and grace. Yet it was Seraphine who now played a crucial role, directing the charm's light, focusing its energy, and creating a shield that pushed back the darkness. The rival leader lunged toward them, his eyes glowing brighter than before, magic swirling around his hands. Kale's movement slowed. The leader's power was immense, unlike anything they had faced before. "You must act," Kale said, his voice low and urgent. "Now, Seraphine." Seraphine drew in a shaky breath and let the energy of the charm flow through her completely. The silver light expanded, pulsing with warmth and strength, entwining with Kale's own aura. Together, they created a force that surged outward like a wave, powerful enough to push the rival faction back. The wind howled, the red moon casting them in sharp relief, and for a moment the world seemed to stand still. The rival leader's eyes widened, recognition flashing across his face. "Impossible," he hissed. How can mere mortals?" Kale stepped forward, his voice booming like the toll of a great bell. "We are no mere mortals. We are bound by trust, courage, and love. That is the power you cannot understand." The light from Seraphine's charm flared brilliantly, blinding and beautiful, and the leader stumbled, overwhelmed. The remaining attackers faltered, their energy dispersed by the combined strength of the bond they could not break. For a brief moment, the storm seemed to pause. The castle's rooftop was quiet, save for the distant echo of rain and the soft beating of two hearts bound together against centuries of darkness. Kale's hand remained in hers and his gaze softened, the intensity of the vampire king tempered by the vulnerability of a man who had trusted someone completely. "You have done it," he said, his voice almost reverent. "You have faced the curse with courage. You have proven that love, real, true trust, can surpass even the darkest of magic." Seraphine's chest swelled with relief, but also a strange sadness. The world they had faced was still filled with shadows. The curse had been challenged, but she knew danger would never fully leave a kingdom ruled by centuries of power and ambition. Kale leaned closer, the wind whipping around them, and his hand brushed a stray lock of hair from her face. "You are extraordinary," he said softly. "Not just in bravery, but in your heart. The curse has been weakened tonight, but more importantly, I have been changed. Because of you." Seraphine's fingers trembled as she clutched his hand tightly. I don't know if I can ever fully understand your world," she admitted. "But I do know that I will stand with you, always." Kale's eyes glimmered with something deeper than passion, a mixture of gratitude, longing, and awe. "Then we will face it together. Whatever comes, we will face it side by side." The storm began to abate, the first hints of dawn brushing the horizon. Lightning flashed one final time, illuminating the rooftop in silver light. The castle below seemed to breathe, its centuries of shadows and secrets momentarily quiet, as if acknowledging the bond that had been forged above its towers. Kale pulled Seraphine close, their foreheads touching, the world falling away to the sound of the wind and their own hearts. "Tonight," he said, voice low and intense, "you have proven that courage, trust, and love can conquer even the darkest magic. And though shadows will always linger, we will face them together." Seraphine nodded, feeling the weight of the night settle into something she could bear. She had faced danger, confronted the unknown, and stood beside a man whose power was as infinite as it was terrifying. And yet, in the eye of that storm, she had also found a connection that transcended fear, a bond stronger than any curse. The rival faction lay defeated below the rooftop, the last remnants of their dark magic dissipating into the storm. And as the first rays of sunlight touched the horizon, painting the clouds in gold and crimson, Kale and Seraphine stood together, hands intertwined, ready to face whatever future awaited them. "Even now," Seraphine whispered, "I can feel it. The shadows are still here." Kale smiled faintly, a mixture of pride and solemnity. "Yes, but shadows cannot overcome the bond we share. They may test us, they may challenge us, but we are stronger together. That is the truth the curse could never take from us." For a long moment they stood on the rooftop, the wind howling around them, the castle beneath their feet, and the red moon fading as dawn took its place. In that quiet, fragile peace, Seraphine realized something profound. She was no longer merely a visitor in this world of shadows and power. She was a part of it, bound not by fear or obligation, but by trust, courage, and the bond she shared with the Vampire King. And even as the shadows lingered, waiting for the next test, waiting for the next challenge, they were no longer alone. Together, they were unbreakable. Lightning flashed faintly one last time, and in that brief brilliance, Seraphine saw the future, uncertain, dangerous, yet filled with the promise of love, trust, and courage that could withstand even the darkest of nights. Cale's eyes met hers, and the intensity of his gaze held a promise. The bond they had forged tonight would endure, beyond curses, beyond shadows, beyond time itself. "Always," he said softly, as the first warm light of morning painted the castle in golden hues. Seraphine smiled, her heart steady now, no longer trembling with fear. "Always," she whispered back. And as the sun rose, spilling warmth across the ancient stones of Castle Varian, the night's darkness and the curse it had awakened were held at bay, bound by courage, trust, and the bond of two hearts united against the shadows. The Vampire King and his chosen stood together, victorious not only over their enemies, but over the fear that had sought to divide them. And though the world would continue to test them, they had discovered the greatest power of all, the power of trust, love, and courage in the face of darkness. The castle was quiet. The storm had passed, but the bond they shared would forever burn brighter than any shadow.